All right, we're back. We got another week of I think we're going full into the Freedom Tech Policy Hour podcast now. Not looking back. Our Bitcoin days are not past us. They're just part of a larger set of tech issues that we cover on a weekly basis. So we're going to make the shift. We're going to plant the flag, and we'll have Zach Shapiro back with us next week to officially do that. But this week we're joined by Ken Egan as usual, and our good friend Sam Lyman, head of research at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Sam, thanks for joining. Thanks for filling in here.
Yeah, great to be with you guys.
Cool. All right, Ken, let's kick off here. There's been some interesting movement from the Treasury Department, and in particular, our good friend Secretary Scott Bessent. Maybe good friend sort of overstates things a little bit here, but certainly interesting to watch what's coming out of the Treasury Department. So, Ken, fill us in on kind of what was going on last week with some of the long-dated Treasury bond stuff and maybe the broader movement on that end.
My first question is, Sam Lyman is still ghostwriting Secretary Bessent's speeches, because Secretary Bessent's he's been en fuego for the past couple of days. I don't know. I think he's still channeling the spirit of Sam in his words. It's quite a week. Yeah, it's funny. We were sort of expanding our remit beyond Bitcoin, and yet here we are. Bitcoin has the best week, up 25% in just a couple of days, and that amazing move is directly related to what's coming out of the Treasury. We discussed this 2 weeks ago when that iconic note that Secretary Bessent left on the cabinet room table, signaling to the market that there would be an intervention in currency markets because of the yen, to prop up the yen. A few weeks later, we had the Treasury announcing buybacks, but the initial announcement was very vanilla. It was, we're going to issue short-term debt, and we're going to buy back our long-term debt. Once that 30-year Treasury hit that magic 5.3%, government funding costs just became too expensive. We're at $40 trillion now. $40 trillion in debt. It's pretty remarkable when you say it out loud. It's beyond our capacity to even visualize what that looks like. What is $40 trillion of anything? So that, I think there was the initial move. And then just yesterday, or maybe it was 2 days ago, we're recording on Wednesday, the secretary said that they might actually use TGA funds to conduct the buybacks. So previously, and the Bitcoin market loved this, when he announced initial buybacks, it was sort of swapping short for long. No net net additional liquidity mentioned into the system. Now, I think the Treasury's sitting on about $1 trillion in cash right now. We're in the post tax collection phase, always like this in the end of the summer, toward the end of the fiscal year. And with that $1 trillion, he mentioned, I think he said to CNBC, or was reported on CNBC, that the Treasury might actually use the TGA to conduct buybacks. That, of course, would be a net liquidity addition to the system, which is, it's kind of yield curve control, or maybe a little bit of backdoor QE, but it's certainly money printer go burr when you're adding liquidity to the system, which again is why you're seeing the debasement trade back on the front pages of all the financial media. The interesting thing is, though, there are a couple of reasons for this. There are debt issues, of course, and the need to roll over our debt and keep the government funded. But I think there are also a couple of things. I think this is directly related to the AI build out. I think the secretary understands that we have to win this, and as we all know, the build out has moved from positive cash flows. All of the hyperscalers had a lot of money up to the end of last year. Now they're issuing debt, and of course, when you're issuing debt, I think Oracle bonds are yielding 8%. You're in competition. Debt markets are debt markets. Everybody's in competition for those relatively scarce dollars. And I think he understood the need to keep rates down, to keep the funding of that build out advantageous for investors. I also think this is, in its own way, I don't want to say an attack, but it's certainly a response to continued Chinese currency controls. I think the yuan trades at like 6.7 the dollar, something like that. It is unnaturally weak, and that, of course, helps bolster Chinese exports. This is a national security priority for the United States. And I think Secretary Bessent is trying to push the dollar down against other currency pairs, including the Chinese yuan, to make Chinese products less competitive, to make American products more competitive, and to start ever so slowly, but to start sort of evening out that trade imbalance.
Yeah, this is interesting, and Sam, obviously you're familiar with this given your background and experience prior to BPI. I'm curious, if you can sort of outline for us, how what we're seeing in this current moment sort of fits into the broader, Treasury or Secretary Bessent agenda for this, presidency, and sort of how far through you think we are in that, what Ken is talking about with this sort of, transitioning out, or transitioning away from, the sort of current order.
Sure. Yeah. So when Secretary Bessent took office, you guys might remember that he proposed what he called the 333 plan. The 333 plan included three core targets: 3% GDP growth, a 3% budget deficit, and 3 million barrels of oil being produced here in the United States a day. I think the most difficult target to achieve there is the 3% budget deficit. And Secretary Bessent has long prided himself as being the best bond salesman in the world, and he's brightly earned that title. If there's one thing Secretary Bessent knows how to do extremely well, it's money markets. It's understanding how different currencies trade with one another. And I think what's the most difficult prong in that 333 plan is getting the budget deficit down. And obviously, treasury yields are a constant struggle. I think something that relates to what we do at BPI, though, is a particular focus on stablecoins. What we need desperately right now as a country is new demand for US Treasury notes. And one of the best places of new demand for US Treasuries is stablecoins. I think we'll see in the years ahead, especially as the digital asset bull market seems to be reawakening right now, you're going to see a lot of innovation in the stablecoin space. And it behooves us as a country to facilitate that stablecoin innovation, because in the years to come, we're going to need new demand for treasury notes on every end of the yield curve, short-term notes as well as long-term notes as well. And so my hope is that going forward, you'll see stablecoins become increasingly prominent in our digital asset strategy as a country. That's absolutely necessary at this point, because treasury yields as they currently stand are one of the biggest obstacles holding us back from getting down to a 3% budget deficit.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, this is an interesting moment, and certainly an interesting intersection, I think with, a lot of the different angles that we're playing at BPI, or at least thinking about. There's this really interesting intersection of, the sort of broader political moment that we're in and digital assets. And then, like Ken was mentioning, this moment sort of also features very prominently the data center question. So Ken, let's talk a little bit more about the liquidity side of things, because I think that's certainly a major component here, and something that will motivate, I would say, both the conversation on the AI side of things and on the digital asset side of things, and in particular for us on the Bitcoin side. So walk us through a little bit, the sort of liquidity question and the sort of liquidity needs, I would say, that we're facing right now. What are the big drivers of needing to keep the liquidity in the system, and what are the biggest sort of like benefactors of that?
It's interesting now. Bloomberg reported this, that the largest holder of U.S. debt is the United Kingdom. Of course, everyone knows it's not actually the United Kingdom. It's a country barely staying afloat, but it's hedge funds running their trades through London, because treasury markets have become, it's become really sort of it's a reflection of the carry trade and repo markets. Way. I'm like this deep on repo. We should get Nick Bhatia back on. Nick could go on forever about this.
Yeah.
That being, though, the repo markets are a critical component of keeping treasury markets functioning. This is where VCs will buy and sell, and get their leverage. And leverage, of course, when you're 40 trillion in debt, you need people willing to take on leverage. In terms of liquidity, again, remember, I think the anticipated number for the data center build out over the next 2 years is $2 trillion. Again, as I mentioned before, the hyperscalers exhausted their positive cash flows end of last year, and everything else now is financed. There's a lot of stories about how Oracle financing. We know that a lot of companies, Google, SpaceX, have pivoted, not pivoted, but certainly expanded their compute offerings because there's money involved. I think Anthropic's giving Elon Musk, was it $9 billion to buy compute. Oracle's build out is essentially subsidizing. Well, subsidized is backed by OpenAI. But remember, this it's not just about AI companies. This is about the U.S. economy. I think it's 3% of GDP now is attributed to the data center build out, where GDP is running. It's 6.5% growth. It's like 3 change positive nominal growth over real growth. And all this requires free cash. And this is not just compute. This is about construction jobs. This is about building out supply chains. The entire AI stack we discussed before, whether it's mining critical minerals, building new supply chains, construction jobs, all the things that go into actually putting these things up before you even turn them on. And then when you turn them on, you've got to have power. You've got to have all the other things that make these things run. So there is certainly the national security component of the need to win the AI race against the Chinese. Right now, I think the number is like 70% of compute in the world being built is built by the United States, which is I think our sanctions and export controls against Chinese companies importing the best chips are working. But that's not a global fix. That's that's something to slow them down. They're still going to keep they're on the move, as we know. We've seen lots of announcements. Chinese companies, CXMT. They're trying to build their own memory ecosystem, and inevitably they will be ahead, but that's inevitable. But the point is that we can't stop moving. And not for the AI build out, I don't know what the economic picture looked like though. But it's not just about the AI build out. All the things, all the sort of the stack aspects of the stack that go into building data centers, go into building houses, go into building a breadth of things across the economy. And this is why the AI build out is so important, because it is essentially funding the reindustrialization of the United States on some level. And to do that, you need borrowed money. And unfortunately, when you're in a situation where Treasuries are the safest bet, right, the safest asset in the world, if you can earn over 5% by sitting in a safe Treasury, assuming no risk at all, you might not decide that 6% on a hyperscaler bond or 7% is worth it, because there is risk involved. This is why so beyond just the debt markets, I think Secretary Bessent and the administration understand that they need to keep borrowing costs down. They're going to keep cash flowing into the build out, because the build out's it's about AI, but it's about also everything else.
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle as well. And it sort of shines a light, I would say, on like the task that Secretary Bessent is holding, which is to sort of I think correct many years of sort of I would say like financial mismanagement of our larger financial situation, and meanwhile sort of implementing President Trump's agenda of, like you were saying, Ken, sort of reindustrializing and revitalizing the homeland.
It's pretty unprecedented. You have 6.5% GDP growth and ballooning government deficits. That's just not normally how it works. But that's how it works now.
Yeah, right. Sam, let's dig into that a little bit further. Like, do you think these things are like sort of in conflict, I guess is my question here. Like, it seems to me like that is a sort of challenging position to be put in. But I'm curious if there's actually some sort of back of the envelope math here that sort of ties these ideas together.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, that's for sure. Going back to the 333 plan, we talked previously about the 3% budget deficit. I think the critical component here, though, is the other prong of the 333 plan, which is the 3% GDP growth. And the data center build out is directly tied to achieving that goal of 3% GDP growth. So much is being staked right now on artificial intelligence and the long-term bet that artificial intelligence will dramatically expand our productivity as a nation. I think you'll start to see those productivity gains show in the numbers in the next year in a way that hasn't shown up in the last year. I think at BPI, we were early adopters to AI, and personally, anecdotally, we've all seen how AI has 2x or 3x our personal productivity at work. I think you're going to start to see those same effects in the broader economy as later adopters start using it and integrating it into their own workflow. And so this is what's absolutely critical here, is a lot hinges on the data center build out, including our ability to grow our way out of debt. That's been the administration's plan all along. It's been to keep taxes low to stimulate growth across the economy. And then that growth paired with the productivity gains brought about by artificial intelligence would allow us to grow so much and expand our GDP so significantly that the tax revenue coming in as a result exceeds what it would have otherwise. And so that's critically important right now. And that's why it's necessary as a country that we succeed in building out artificial intelligence capacity. You know, Ken, you mentioned something about reindustrialization just now. And I think that's what's missing in the data center debate is a lot of people heard about reindustrialization, which has become sort of a meme at this point. And they think of reindustrialization as bringing all the steel factories back online, bringing all the textile factories back online. And that's part of it. But the much bigger part of reindustrialization is this particular focus on high precision manufacturing, which includes fabs, which is, you know, the production of semiconductors, but also includes the production of artificial intelligence itself, which is what data centers are. People don't recognize that data centers are at their core intelligence factories. These are plants that manufacture artificial intelligence, which right now is arguably the most valuable asset in the modern economy. And the unfortunate thing is we are reindustrializing as a nation. Ken speaks often about the whole AI stack. A lot of people conceive of AI as their chat interactions with Claude or ChatGPT, when in reality, the whole AI stack includes a massive blue collar job sector that includes plumbers, electricians, construction workers, data technicians, carpenters, and these particular jobs are booming right now. We're witnessing a blue collar boom as the result of the data center build out, which is why it's critical that it succeeds, not only for managing our debt over the long term, but being able to grow as an economy in the short to medium term as well. And so that's something that's important for people to recognize. Reindustrialization and the data center build out are one and the same. Reindustrialization means building AI fabs or semiconductor fabs and data centers. There's that famous tweet where somebody a couple years ago said, "What do you think decolonization meant? Vibes, essays?" And I think that's become a meme format now. And I just want to say to people, what do you think reindustrialization meant? Vibes, essays? The data center build out is reindustrialization at its core. It's different than we thought it would have looked like a few years ago because artificial intelligence was still emerging as a field. But we are clearly the world's leader right now in artificial intelligence. And if we see that race to China by, for example, enacting a data center moratorium, that stunts our ability to hit that 3% GDP growth marker, and it stunts our ability to manage our debt over the long term. So I very much see these two things as tied together.
Yeah, that's great. Let's dig into the data center question more. I was in Alabama earlier this week for an energy, Bitcoin mining, AI data center conversation with some folks from the local utilities, TVA, Alabama Power, some of the data center, build out providers, hyperscalers, and it was just a really, really interesting conversation. And Sam, one thing that I want to come back to you on that has been a sort of realization for me is that there's sort of, I would say, at minimum, two angles to the data center build out, right? One is the thing that you were talking about, which is, hey, like this is actually a sort of critical like national security component, not just from winning the like so-called AI race against China, but for our sort of like economic future, right? That's a really interesting angle that I think is sort of generally overlooked. And I think the other angle that is, not necessarily overlooked, but maybe isn't quite resonating with people right now. And I'm curious your take on this is for the average American, I'm not sure that the sort of we need to beat China narrative has been especially effective. So I'm curious, if you think, I guess the question here is like, do you think that the sort of narrative of like, hey, this isn't just about beating China, but this is also about sort of securing America's economic security in the 21st century. Do you think that would be a more powerful narrative, or do you think there's sort of a different way that we should be messaging this to, the Midwest or the Deep South where a lot of these data centers are going?
Yeah, Zach, that's a really good point. I think there are three messages in total, and you hit on two of them just now. There's the national security angle. We need to win the AI race to win China. Whoever dominates AI in the future is going to dominate the information layer of the global economy. So that's critically important, that whoever dominates that layer is the United States, American ideals, and that isn't the CCP. You hit second on the economic security angle, which is 100% true. We need to win the AI race in order to succeed as a country in the 21st century. And third, maybe this is more of a corollary of that second angle. I would say that winning the AI race is important for every American's personal economic empowerment. And I think that's the winning message here. That's something that's not being told right now in the headlines and legacy media. What we were talking about earlier was the economic revitalization of Rust Belt towns and rural America. These are the very places that were left behind by globalization. But with the data center build out right now, you're seeing old steel plants coming back online because they're being refashioned as data centers. You're seeing places in flyover country that had no economic prospects over the last 20 years suddenly have a data center being built in their vicinity that's creating hundreds of jobs that are temporary, and then a substantial amount of jobs that will be long-term jobs in those communities. And most importantly, you're having data centers drive huge amounts of tax revenue in these jurisdictions. The state of West Virginia, for example, is currently considering eliminating state income tax altogether for its citizens through data center property tax revenue. You're also seeing teachers receive $50,000 bonuses in Louisiana that comes from the property and sales taxes paid by the Meta data center being built down the road. And so you're seeing this economic revitalization take place across the country. And I think what's important here is recognizing that to be pro data center is to be pro worker. And this is where Bernie Sanders finds himself in a bind. He states that he wants a federal data center moratorium because he supports America's workers. But those two positions are very much at odds with one another. Consider that we've had over 30 unions and labor organizations across the country come out to defend the data center build out. Why is that? It's because data centers have been a tremendous boon for blue collar job creation. The construction industry is a perfect example. Construction jobs are at an all-time high right now, over 8.3 million construction jobs across the country, and that's all been driven by the data center build out. Simultaneously, you have unions representing electricians, representing plumbers, who are saying that our industry is receiving the biggest boost it's received in years because of the AI build out. And that's what is so critical here. It's the story that's not being told that needs to be told. Data centers and the AI build out generally are driving a blue collar boom across the country. And I think it's important to recognize that AI, we often think of AI and the impact it will have on the white collar workforce. And there's fears surrounding that, but those fears haven't been borne out in the numbers thus far. Whereas when you look at the blue collar workforce, the AI build out has been a huge benefit in the creation of new jobs in that area. And so that's a particular message that we need to emphasize as we make the case for the data center build out, is that these data centers are critically important for blue collar jobs in particular. And I think they'll be critically important for white collar jobs in the future as well. But it's the blue collar sector that's seen the most impact right now.
Yeah, this is really interesting. And I love to hear that from you, because I don't feel like people are sort of sharing that message quite as much as they should be. And you know, it is interesting at the same time where, you know, you are seeing this really interesting response to, in particular, AI data centers and not so much other data centers. So I want to kind of pick this apart further, because Sam, I do agree, like this narrative that you have or you've sort of dictated here, and that is certainly true, maybe isn't being sort of passed down or isn't sort of obvious in the numbers. So Ken, we were kind of going back and forth about this Jasmine Sun article. You had read the article itself. I'd listened to the podcast in standard Zoomer fashion.
Shout out Jasmine.
But I'm curious, you know, what's your read on the findings of this article? I think for, you know, just for the record here, like I think my big takeaway, Ken, and we'll hear yours, is you know, the large and sort of looming opposition to data centers isn't so much about the profile of the data center or the water or the electricity. That it's more so about sort of people in these towns where the data centers are being constructed feeling like they're sort of powerless, that they have their sort of local officials making deals behind closed doors. We've all heard about the sort of NDAs that have been signed by local government officials, and really that's an interesting angle because it seems like there's a lot that we could do about that. But yeah, Ken, I'm curious what your major takeaway was from that article, and your sort of read on what's driving this, just massive opposition to data centers here, and in particular AI data centers, because it doesn't seem like these these findings on the polling are actually spread across all data centers. It's in particular the AI data centers.
And Pew put out some research just a couple weeks ago, and it's like these things happen. You get a wave of opposition, and I think we're like we're in a cresting wave of opposition to data centers. And you think back just a few years ago, even some of the AI data centers a couple of years back were like competing. Municipalities were competing to get these things, offering tax breaks, and like you wonder if you're Google Oracle, like I should have did this like how many years ago. I think Jasmine, our article's good. It was really well done because she was on the ground. She sort of walked through. She was sort of thinking through where she should go. I mean, I think she ultimately said that she didn't want to go to New Mexico in the summer or Arizona. Not bad. I think her opening lines of the article described Wisconsin as like driving through Eden in the summer because it's like 70 degrees and red and green and beautiful. But she does a good job because she talks to both sides, and I think it hits. I think what I took away with it, I think she does a good job, and I think in some of her subsequent podcasts she's talked about this, is the opposition to these data centers. There are practical concerns. I mean, there's concerns from these towns that have been screwed over by companies in the past, companies that promised investment that didn't materialize, companies that left municipalities with large cleanup bills, these brown sites that just ended up costing millions and millions of dollars to clean up because the companies cut and run. So there's some scar tissue, and I think that's a scar tissue that's been forming in sort of upper Midwest since probably since the 80s. And I think she does a good job of capturing that zeitgeist. But I think I also took away from that is that AI represents, it is just sort of the overall general anxiety about the future, about falling behind. And I'll say this, like the Frontier Labs have like done an absolutely horrifying job at explaining this. I think it's a Silicon Valley messaging. I think the effective altruists out there just are completely disconnected from reality. Again, we've joked, I've never been a billionaire, like, AI founder. But were I a billionaire AI founder, I hope I'd be a little more in tune to, what I was telling people. And when you tell people about, these things are going to like take your jobs and possibly murder you and your children, maybe you're not in such a rush to like build the, an enabling AI data center next to your kid's school. But I think it does show, and we talked about the foreign influence aspects of this, which are real. But the best influence operations are things that sort of catch a wave. It's very hard to sort of build, even through like covert influence stuff. Had to build opposition that becomes true just out of nowhere. There has to be fertile ground, and there's fertile ground here. But I think my takeaway from Jasmine's article, and I think a lot of there's been some other good reporting from some people. Again, Substack is like the place to go if you want to learn about this stuff. Is that there is this general anxiety about the future. People feel like they're being left behind. The cost of living discussions, all the things that are like resonating across every demographic, certainly in this election cycle, are like amplified by the AI data discussion. And you put on top of that the most unsympathetic spokespeople in the world, and all of a sudden you just get a great just sort of a great it is the perfect cocktail for mass opposition, because you're confronting something with you're forcing people to confront something they don't understand, they don't use. The numbers are still, I think 40% of Americans have never even used even once, like gone on to like Grok or like ChatGPT and tried it. That's huge. Less than 5% use AI regularly. The gains in the economy so far have been uneven. It just has the benefits that AI I think will afford manufacturing, healthcare just aren't there yet. They're coming, but I think this is, again, we weren't having this discussion 3 years ago. It takes time. And I think AI, because of all those things, it just makes it a very easy and convenient thing to hate. and it's been aided and abetted by the behavior on some level of the industry, aided and abetted by decades of broken promises in some of these places. You don't see that. I think you probably saw it in Alabama, even in Tennessee, right, which I think is generally favorable to data centers. You do see opposition, and people talk about Loudoun County, Virginia, and I agree. Loudoun County is one of the richest counties in the world, in the United States. It's a beautiful place. Now, it is, of course, in the sort of the Cantillon bubble, right? It is not a normal. Loudoun County is not a normal county because it is still within shrapnel range of the great money printer from DC. But nonetheless, Loudoun County's benefited from the data centers, and it maybe makes it not the best example to tell people out in Wisconsin or Michigan, where Jasmine Sun did her reporting. Nonetheless, I think it is a reflection of overall anxiety, cost of living problems. People are really worried about what their kids are going to do with their lives, and decades of just broken promises and disappointment on every what administration has not promised economic revitalization of the heartland. It's never come. And I think people now, it's funny, like some of the Pew polling showed people would literally rather have a coal plant next to their house than a data center, which
by a wide margin, right? Like,
yes,
almost double the percentage would prefer that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know there's some people who said this, I forget who it was, like noise is money. When you're making noise, you're making money. But I'm guessing a coal plant is louder than an AI data center, but it shows you the depth of opposition, and a little bit of paranoia because people are just really, because the coal plant is whatever it is dirty, produces power. The AI data center produces revolutions, and people just, on the economic front, on the social front, people don't like that, and it makes them nervous. And again, the industry's just done a terrible job of explaining to people in an adult way, what this will bring them, some of the challenges. There are challenges when you build a data center. I mean, building anything, there's challenges to it, but they've done a really, really bad job of explaining to people why the ad build out's important and what it will mean actually for them.
Yeah. Sam, I want to go to you on the foreign influence because obviously Ken, Zach, and I have talked about it a bit. This is really sort of your baby. Ken said, and I appreciate this, sort of image that the foreign influence was laid on fertile ground. I'm curious if you can kind of unpack that for us, what you think that particular fertile ground is. And then, if you want to just kind of share, at a high level, what your findings were and what your major takeaways were on the foreign influence, I think, everyone would love to hear that from you directly.
Definitely. So Ken hit on an interesting point. Far more than any foreign actor, the people who have done the most to sow fear and anger about data centers and AI generally are certain AI executives who, how Ken mentioned, have gone out of their way to tell people that the product they're building is dangerous, it could end humanity, and it will definitely steal their jobs. It's the worst PR messaging in all time. I think it's a message that resonated with Wall Street investors, but is absolutely repellent to Main Street Americans. I think it resonated for Wall Street because they were being pitched on the idea that their artificial intelligence would be the end-all be-all of the economy. I think I saw just yesterday, Anthropic, there are some people predicting a $30 trillion valuation, which I think is just beyond the pale. But it shows just how high in their own supply they can get. And being high in their own supply, they can say some pretty wild things about the impact that their product will have on the economy. That's been absolutely disastrous, though, in getting the American people on their side when it comes to artificial intelligence. So that's the fertile ground, is a general environment of fear and deep-seated anxiety about what this product will do to not only the country, but to humanity. And so what we've seen with a lot of foreign influence operations in the past is seldom do they seed a narrative, but often they latch onto an existing narrative and they foment anger and paranoia surrounding it. And that's exactly what we saw take place with the data center debate. We are seeing right now a lot of Americans in rural America who are very concerned about the AI build out. And we've been tracking as an organization the messaging coming from Chinese English language propaganda outlets for the last year. These very propaganda outlets, which again are sanctioned by the CCP, directed by the CCP, have been messaging to Americans that data centers will spike their electricity prices, that data centers will consume enormous amounts of water, and that they'll be economically disastrous for the communities where these data centers are being built. And so that's the message that Beijing wants Americans to hear. Now, that message is undermined by the fact that back in China, the same propaganda arms are celebrating AI milestones in their country, and they're subsidizing the usage of energy by data centers in China by up to 50%. So much so that the public perception of artificial intelligence in China is overwhelmingly positive. More than 50% of Chinese citizens say that they're very optimistic about the AI future, as opposed to about 17% of American citizens. So it shows you that the PSYOP that's been propagated there, not only by the CCP, but also by a general environment of fear that's grown organically here in the United States surrounding this product. Now, what we did in our research was we looked even deeper at the nonprofit networks and political organizations that have connections to China that have been very active in the anti-data center cause. And in particular, we've identified Neville Singham, who's a Shanghai-based Marxist multimillionaire who lives in China, shares office space with a Chinese propaganda company, and has been identified by different news organizations, including the New York Times, as being among the foremost proponents of Chinese propaganda to the Western world. And we've noticed that his particular nonprofit network has been very active in the anti-data center cause, and that his political vehicle called the Party for Socialism and Liberation has actually been boots on the ground in dozens of anti-data center protests across the country. This group, PSL is its acronym, has actually just 10 miles up the road from Washington, D.C., been pinpointed as the lead organizer in an effort to stop a $5 billion data center in Landover, Maryland. And not only were they able to stop a $5 billion data center project from going forward, they were able to convince the town council there to enact a 2-year data center moratorium. And we're seeing this pattern take place in multiple places across the country. And we've been able to identify about $24 billion in blocked or delayed data center funding that is connected to PSL protests across the country. So there's definitely a foreign influence aspect to this campaign. Again, it's latched on to a domestic homegrown opposition movement, but it has not helped the data center cause in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, this is great. I think the major piece of like feedback I would say that I was hearing, from this conference down in Alabama earlier this week was, basically the data center providers and the hyperscalers were saying, hey, like we did everything right here. We came in, we had someone, funding the Little League baseball team, and we were at the town council meeting, and we sort of articulated exactly what we were going to do to help the community. We promised that we weren't going to raise their electricity prices, and yet the opposition, has realistically only strengthened at this point. So, Ken, I'm curious from your perspective, like, it seems like these data center providers and hyperscalers are doing everything right from a sort of traditional, like, local level government affairs perspective or public affairs perspective. Like they've run the playbook that has been successful for the past however many years, and it's not working. Do you think it's time for us to basically update that playbook? And if so, what do you think is going to be sort of necessary to turn this issue around?
Yeah. I'll say this, like, on the policy side in DC, like the data center people have been just absent. I don't see an organized defense. I don't see sort of the planning that you generally see when you face this kind of competition. I understand, like, you're an incumbent industry and you're faced with something, as visceral as this has become. It takes you, a little bit of time to sort of get together, and figure out how to handle it. But I've not seen, I think you're seeing, like you mentioned, like I think Oracle is like sponsoring like theme parks. I think the companies are trying an old playbook, but I think they're missing the point that this is no longer. I mean, I think there's all politics is local on some level, but they're sort of missing because right now there's an absence of defenders in DC. We've had chats with pretty senior staffers and some senior folks, and they've been very honest with us. Like, nobody wants to talk about this now because it's just not really a winner. There's a lot of opposition, and there's no cogent support for it. There's no sort of organized messaging, explaining to people why they should, this is good for you or will be good for you or whatever. And this is theoretically what the industry is supposed to be doing, and it's just not doing a great job at it. And the fact that you're losing, you've got, I think you have moratoriums or consider moratoriums under consideration. I think 48 states, and when you have something like this that goes bipartisan, when you lose, there's issues that are partisan. That's just the nature of things. But when you see and you lose control of a narrative and you see bipartisan opposition emerge, and these are not like squishy like Northeastern Republicans. This is like Paxton in Texas. I think Vivek Ramaswamy has a very good balanced view on it, but he's taking on board the opposition. But he's thinking through what this might look like in a productive way. But when you lose both sides, you've clearly made some kind of a miscalculation. You've not handled the situation correctly. And we'll see how elections play out. But I think they have to recognize what they're facing. I think they're trying. I think the idea of funding the little leagues, it's all good stuff. But I don't think the opposition is. I think the opposition is coming. You're seeing sort of mass broad messaging across the country about what these things are, what they do. And they need to better face that. I think they've built and probably executed a local playbook, because again, remember, I think they built the playbook they're using was when it's like how to get tax breaks from your county to build a data center, and that is not the case anymore. I just think they were ill prepared for the nature of the opposition. I don't think they've done a good job connecting it to the larger sort of social concerns that people have, the larger economic concerns. I agree with Sam. I think, telling people in Wisconsin, no, this will help us beat the Chinese. It's like, all right, whatever. I mean, maybe build it somewhere else. But yeah, I want to beat China too, but I don't want to do it, in my own house. That's not, I think, gonna sell. But I think they need to but I think that's part of the thing they need to be understand and be talking about in DC, to prevent that sort of massive now bipartisan opposition to their industry that they're facing. They need to do a better job of keeping people on the sidelines. I understand it. We're in almost September. It's an election year. No one's going to get out there and wave a data center flag in a contested state. It's fine, but you got to try and keep people off the sidelines. And they've just not done a great job at it. Sorry. Sam and I have reached out. We've tried to talk to people across the entire ecosystem. And there's just not a lot of planning, or I would say there's not a lot of proactive measures happening right now. And you have to, again, when you want to beat a narrative like this, you have to be proactive. And I just haven't seen it.
Yeah. Sam, I'm curious if you have a particular thought. I know that this is, sort of really front of mind for you right now of what are some solutions to this issue? Obviously we're sort of running our government connections. We've had a bunch of, congressional testimonies that you've participated in. I'm curious on the more kind of local level, do you have ideas for, again, really how to translate this blue collar boom that you talked about earlier into very tangible benefits for, citizens in these local jurisdictions?
Yeah, Zach, that's probably the biggest question right now in Washington is how do you fix the data center issue? I think people on both sides of the aisle
make it go away.
Grappling with this.
Yeah,
or make it go away. The good news is, and maybe I'm bold in saying this, I think there is a solution, and it's something we've been putting a lot of thought and research into at BPI over the last couple months here. The solution, I believe, is data center dividends, which means remitting a portion of the property and sales taxes that towns collect from data centers directly to citizens in the form of a physical check. So there's real precedent for this. If we look at the state of Alaska, Alaska has what's called the Alaska Permanent Fund. Not many people know about this. And when you hear about it, part of you thinks, oh, maybe I'll move to Alaska. But then you remember how cold it gets there and how little the sun shines in the wintertime. But the Alaska Permanent Fund is an incredible monetary tool that the state wields to reward its own citizens for oil production in the state. So back in the 1970s, this fund was established, which takes oil royalties and invests those royalties into a fund. And then the investment returns are given to citizens, and not just tax-paying citizens, but sometimes children as well, in the form of a physical check every year. Now, this physical check over the last 10 years has ranged between $1,000 to $2,000 annually. So it's incredible. If you are just a kid in Alaska, you're getting a check from your state government for $1,500 for essentially the oil that was produced in your state that year. And it's the state's way of providing a benefit to the citizens who work there, and to get their buy-in for the oil production that takes place in the state. So Alaska is just one model, but what Alaska does is it replicates what is essentially the sovereign wealth fund model. You look at countries like Kuwait, Norway, the UAE, they all have two things in common: a small population relative to their landmass and an incredible energy resource. Turns out rural American counties have those exact same properties. They have a very small population relative to their landmass, and they have an incredible resource in the form of cheap and abundant energy and significant amounts of land where these data centers can be built, where these intelligence factories can thrive. The idea here with data center dividends is you take the model of the Alaska Permanent Fund, you take the model of sovereign wealth funds from Norway to the UAE, and you apply that on the local county level. So you look at a 1 gigawatt data center, estimates for how much tax revenue that data center will produce every year are between 20 to $40 million. That's huge, especially for these local counties whose typical county tax revenue ranges between, let's say, 10 to $15 million a year. You have these 1 gigawatt data centers that can potentially double and in some cases triple your tax revenue as a county. The point here is you can use some of those funds to then remit payments directly to the residents of that county. And we've done some back of the napkin math on our research team at BPI to look at how much these data center dividends could be worth. And it looks like they could be worth between $5,000 to $10,000 a year for each household in these rural counties. So it's not enough for data center companies to tell residents of a rural county how the data centers won't hurt them. They need to explain how the data centers will help them. And data center dividends are arguably the most tangible way that a data center can actually change the life of your family. Imagine getting a $5,000 check every year from your local government that you can then put towards a college fund or that you can invest. This is substantial money in a lot of counties that make below the median national wage. And so I think data center dividends are one way that we can jujitsu this issue in such a way that data centers actually become a winning idea, a winning proposal for people on both sides of the aisle. We're still building out the research right now, and we intend to release this proposal next week, but we're really excited about it, and I think it could make a lot of waves.
Yeah, I think this is great. Like I think my big takeaway from this event earlier this week was, really like what the things that we've tried, or that the data center providers and hyperscalers have tried on the local level, like just really unfortunately like aren't working. I think there's a lot of frustration. I think there's a lot of confusion. I think, Sam, that's part of why this foreign influence report, or the two parts of it have gotten, such significant interest. It's because it sort of seems to be explaining something that has largely to this point been, inexplicable, or at least, helps to kind of fill in the gaps on some of these things. And I think this is a really interesting, sort of novel idea. Not completely novel, right? Like the corollary to the Alaska, situation shows that there's very strong precedent for doing something like this. This isn't completely out of left field, but it certainly wasn't part of the sort of standard playbook of, sort of local politics. So I think this is really interesting. I think this is the moment we're in where these sort of creative solutions are absolutely necessary. And I think the biggest thing, and Sam, we'll come back to you on this, is like the key here is just being sort of human centered, right? I think the gripe that a lot of people have, and that both of you have expressed already from the sort of AI, tech or business leaders, is that they're very sort of, I would say like robotic in their narrative telling. It's very much kind of focused on the technology. It's focused on the economy. And it certainly sort of, in my mind, like decenters the individual. And for us and our thinking at BPI and Sam, the research that you're doing, what we're really thinking is like, how do we recenter the individual in this? How do we take the funding that's coming from these data centers, and put it in the pockets of everyday Americans in Wisconsin and Alabama and Tennessee and Missouri? I think that's the thing that's going to propel us forward in this moment. And I think that's really, I think, a broader trend that we're going to see with the AI build out, is, how do we harness this really, really important technological advancement for humans? Right. It feels like there's this sort of division happening where the humans being separated from the technology. And our view, I think, at BPI is like, we need to reconverge these two things, that the technology is built to help humans, not to help businesses or governments, but to help people. So I think this is really important. Sam, thank you, for the work that you're doing. I want to sort of get, closer to the finish line here by talking about sort of where we go from here. I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts on this topic. I think the general consensus is that things are going to get worse before they get better. Of course, right? We're talking about a trend here, but curious for both of you, and Ken, we'll start with you. Do you think that's directionally right, that this is going to get worse before it gets better? Do you think it's going to get better, at all? Or do you think hey, we've sort of peaked here, and, with the data center dividends, we're going to turn this thing around immediately?
I think data center dividends. I remember when Sam mentioned this to me. He's like, "What do you think?" I was like, I was pissed. I didn't think about that. It was really good. But I think to the core, no, I think it's going to get a little bit worse. Nothing ever gets better on even years in September through the end of the year in Washington. Anyway, certainly on the policy side, nothing gets better. So I think we're in for a tough couple of months. But I think one of the things we're going to work on at BPI, and this is really important, is, as you said, Zach, is recenter the discussion on people and human flourishing. Just read the Anthropic's constitution. Essentially just describes Claude is a contractor for AI, for Anthropic, and it will do what Anthropic views as good and virtuous. I mean, good and virtuous might have had sort of collective understanding 50, 60 years ago. There's no longer consensus about what those words actually mean. I think some of the things that they've said in the past, we should raise eyebrows. In our mind, when you look at open source, how open source should be structured, these AIs on some level should be like your fiduciary. They should be acting on your behalf. They should. It is your tool. You're using it, and it should be acting in your best interest. There's always going to be discussions about, how do just like the internet. You can't use it for different things, illegal things, fine. But generally speaking, we haven't figured out yet cardinal direction in DC on the policy side. I think in our mind, we want to see this discussion move back to how AI can serve humans, how that AI tool can serve as your fiduciary, kind of like your lawyer. It works on your behalf. It's not working on behalf of a company. It's not working on behalf of sort of these, ideas about what humanity should and shouldn't become. And I think if you bring it back to that, I think we'll be in a much better position to make the case. Because frankly, that's how I think AI's full potential will be reached across the economy, is if it does serve its users, not necessarily the people who write the code. But I think if we can, and that's what we're going to be working on now for now and for forever, maybe not forever, but for a long time. How do we recenter that discussion back on centering AI around human potential, human flourishing? Because it's very easy for it to slip past that, because there's a lot of humans and they have very few advocates in the world.
Yeah, Sam, I'm curious your thoughts on this too. Are we sort of trending in the right direction here? Is this going to reverse? And are we sort of on the right track, I would say, with trying to get through this?
Yeah, on the data center front, I think of everything, maybe it's because I'm a Bitcoiner, but I think of everything in terms of cycles, bull markets and bear markets. And it's definitely the bull market for anti-data center sentiment right now. I think we're very close to the Pico top, though, in large part because this has become a mass psychosis. The ban all data centers is the defund police of the current moral panic. And this level of hysteria and anger that's not supported by facts or evidence just can't sustain itself over time. But I think you'll see continued growing opposition, probably leading up to the election, the midterm election, because this has been very much weaponized as a political issue, which is unfortunate. But I think after November, you're going to see the tide shift, and hopefully before November too, because The evidence just needs to be out there. And I think data center dividends and just broader education about the industry can help educate a lot of Americans about the potential good that these facilities can do for their communities. So I'm bearish in the next 2 months, but I think after that, I'll continue to be increasingly bullish. On the point of how do we make this more human, I couldn't agree more with what you guys said. A lot of tech bros or Silicon Valley innovators are very good at understanding machines and systems, but they're not good at understanding human beings. And I think you're seeing that in the marketing of a lot of this artificial intelligence. What differentiates us as an organization is that we believe that human beings are preeminent, that human consciousness supersedes all other forms of consciousness, which, believe it or not, is sometimes in some circles in Silicon Valley a minority view. Some people believe that silicon-based consciousness, as they call it, is the natural successor to humanity, which is the most anti-human, evil way of viewing our fellow human beings. And we are very much in the camp of believing human consciousness supersedes all others. And I think there's a case to be made, and a case that isn't being made right now, that the future with artificial intelligence can actually be incredibly human if we leverage this technology in the right ways. You look at the history of other technological revolutions, they made our lives easier and they made our lives more human. Let's look at the Industrial Revolution with the automation of human labor. Essentially, what got automated away was human brawn, was our muscles that we use to do agricultural work mostly. Then you look at the information revolution, what is getting arguably automated away, at least to some extent, is the human brain, or that monopoly we have on intelligence. But what will never be automated away is the human being. And I think that is going to be the premium in an AI economy. AI, with its abundant intelligence, will be able to do a lot of the grunt knowledge work that we do in office jobs now. But what that will do is it will increase the importance of the human being, those interpersonal interactions that are so essential to human life, I think will become increasingly a part of our day-to-day work life as well. And so that's just one hopeful vision I have for the AI economy. And I think, again, that's a story that needs to be told.
Yeah, that's great. Guys, this has been a great conversation. I would say I'm very personally interested in the data center question. It feels like certainly like a defining question of the moment. Both as a sort of technology interested American, but also as just an American. Right? This is really, I think, crucial to the moment, and it feels like we're really up against it. If you're someone who believes that data centers are a force for good. So yeah, I think we'll kind of wrap it up here. This is, a conversation that's going to be continued. Sam, Ken, thank you both for the work that you're doing, on the Hill and researching and doing everything to try to help kind of figure out a way out of this. And we'll be sure to kind of keep folks updated on the work that we're doing. And as Sam, puts out research, we'll have you back, to talk about it. And I think, as Marty likes to say, we're going to win. We got to keep our heads down and keep going forward here. So thank you both. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.